Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight trilogy is one of my all-time favorite film series. Nolan spent 3 films, in fact, the only time in his career the man ever made a sequel, to tell a story, and he chose The Dark Knight to be his character. Batman just does something to you, you know? We saw Bruce Wayne rising from a traumatized billionaire into Gotham's ultimate protector, and then, in the end, he seemingly sacrificed himself to save his hometown. However, Commissioner Gordon knew the truth about the man behind the mask, and we and Alfred also knew about his happy ending that was a little bit of a secret. This has to be one of the most iconic scenes in the history of cinema. You see, on paper, Bruce managed to escape the life that literally consumed him and his story was over, but Nolan made sure to give us one last shot that kept fans wondering for years. We saw the young and enthusiastic police officer John Blake finding the Batcave and activating its sequences before the screen cuts to black, and no matter how much we yelled, we never really found out what happened to Blake after this. That's a question I've spent many sleepless nights pondering, so I thought, why not share some of my crazier theories with you guys? Join me today as I go down this rabbit hole, and trust me, it's gonna be a crazy ride. Before we try to answer this question, which has been living in our minds rent-free, it's important to check out where Bruce Wayne was when The Dark Knight Rises began. Basically, after the events of The Dark Knight, we saw that Batman had essentially disappeared from public eyes, and 8 years have passed since the Joker caused an absolute ruckus in Gotham and the police launched a manhunt for Batman. Why? Because he took the onus of Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face's crimes, on himself and allowed Gotham to believe that he was the real villain. Batman's selfless deed worked for some time, and the Dent Act helped the police to raid and destroy several crime syndicates. For the time being, Gotham was built on Bruce's vision, and the city was safer and more peaceful than ever. But where was the Caped Crusader? Well, to ensure that Gotham got the life it deserved, Bruce paid a huge price. He locked himself up inside Wayne Manor and detached himself completely from society. Of course, a decision like this was bound to backfire, and Bruce's health was deteriorating. Alfred realized that Bruce had put himself in a dangerous position and was slowly destroying himself because he no longer knew who Bruce Wayne was, if not Batman. However, we all knew it was only a matter of time until the Dark Knight had to rise again, and someone from his extensive rogues gallery was bound to pop up. Of course, we were right, because otherwise why would there be a movie? And this time, it was none other than Bane. Tom Hardy as Bane is still one of the best casting choices from these movies. Nolan actually dug up the Batman comics and drew inspiration from them, including the 1993 Nightfall storyline, which followed Bane's debut in Batman, Vengeance of Bane #1, and famously saw him break Batman's back. He also used the 1986 series The Dark Knight Returns and the 1999 storyline No Man's Land to piece together the narrative of The Dark Knight Rises. Now, with a villain as menacing as Bane threatening to blow up Gotham, Bruce Wayne had no other choice but to come out of hiding. Bane was unlike most other enemies Batman had encountered. He wasn't merely attacking Gotham's population, rather he was doing something much worse by eroding the very foundations of the city that Bruce and Gordon had spent years building. He began by manipulating the stock market and exposing Wayne Enterprises' financial weaknesses. Over time, Bane started trapping the police underground and took control of the entire city. Now, if you were a comic nerd, you already knew that Bane would be serving some severe physical blows to Batman, and yeah, Nolan depicted Batman's back being broken in a devastating manner. Finally, Bruce was forced to decide whether he was actually willing to die for Gotham or if it was just a deep-seated passion he always harbored. During the final act, Bane and Bruce enter a brutal confrontation, but Batman manages to overpower Bane, only for the real architect behind the plot to reveal herself. You probably remember this moment, but the moment Batman realizes that Miranda Tate, the new CEO of Wayne Enterprises and his lover, had been the mastermind all along, was kind of devastating. Miranda was actually Talia al Ghul, the daughter of Ra's al Ghul. Ra's al Ghul, played by Liam Neeson, had been Batman's nemesis ever since the first film, and after Raz's death, Talia made it her goal to ruin Gotham and finish her father's mission. She turned the nuclear reactor created by Wayne Enterprises into a bomb. Lucius Fox initially believed the core could be reconnected to the reactor and stabilized, but Talia activated the emergency flood system, destroying that option and leaving Batman with no way to stop the bomb. Though he did manage to stop Talia, he had to take the bomb as far from Gotham as possible, and he did what he had to. He loaded the bomb onto the Bat and prepared to fly it out over the bay, but before he left, he indirectly told Gordon who Batman really was, and for the people in Gotham, he died. The film later revealed that Bruce had secretly repaired the Bat's autopilot 6 months earlier, explaining how the aircraft could carry the bomb without him. Exactly how and when Bruce escaped is never shown, but the Florence scene confirms that he did indeed survive. I loved Nolan's choice to give us a Bruce Wayne who's deep down just a simple human. He chooses to let go of the toxic loop that began after his parents were murdered. Bruce chooses to live as a normal person, in love and happy, rather than dying as a hero. Listen, I'm not going to dissect the logic behind this ending and why Bruce chose to be with the woman who spent the entire movie trying to steal from him and get him killed. Maybe it was all in Alfred's mind, or maybe it was just Anne Hathaway's face. Yeah, that woman can make anyone do questionable things, but for Alfred, that was Batman's real victory, and I couldn't agree more. But that legendary nod between Bruce and Alfred wasn't the real last scene, and Nolan played us really bad. After Bruce apparently died, Wayne Manor was converted into a home for Gotham's at-risk and orphaned children. Meanwhile, Officer Blake went to Bruce's lawyer's office to collect something left for him in the estate. When he asked the clerk to look under his legal name, she revealed to the audience that it was Robin. Robin. Yep, it was a cute little cameo, and comic book lovers had a real fanboy moment and started predicting whether Blake would become the Robin we're familiar with. Now, after the brief heartwarming moment in Florence, Nolan took us back to Gotham and threw the spotlight on Joseph Gordon-Levitt's John Blake. Throughout the movie, John had been the rebellious police officer who was one of the few to question the official story they put out about Gotham and Batman. He sensed that Bruce Wayne was more than meets the eye, and unlike his colleagues, Blake genuinely acknowledged Batman's importance in the city. He resigned from the Gotham City Police Department, and though we discovered his real name was Robin, the makers made sure not to turn him into a traditional version of Batman's sidekick. Jonathan Nolan, who co-wrote the screenplay, along with his brother, clarified that Blake's name being Robin was just a wink to the fans, and said at New York Comic-Con in 2012 that, "I think what we endeavored to do was not the complete story of Batman, but our complete story of this character." The wink towards Robin was an acknowledgement that he liked the character and I liked the character. It's a huge part of that universe for 70 years. Now, if we take this statement at face value, then Blake was led to the Batcave after receiving a package, and he would seemingly inherit the Batcave. Maybe he would then use Batman's tools to help keep Gotham safe the same way Bruce wanted to, and adopt his own persona. The Nolan brothers didn't really make Blake's fate definitive by introducing him as Batman's sidekick dressed in a colorful costume. Rather, Blake is ideally Nolan's reimagining of the character, which is much more grounded. This person, who was shaped by his experience as a detective and his survival instincts and grew up as an orphan, he could be anything. He could be the Boy Wonder, he could be Nightwing, he could even be a new Batman. If you think about it, when Blake followed the instructions and arrived at the Batcave, the platform rose and the lights came on, and yeah, the equipment was revealed too, but there was no shot of him putting on a suit. There's no direct indication that Bruce has chosen Blake to be his successor, and that's exactly how Nolan intended it to be, no matter how much we believe that the ending indeed suggested that Blake would become the new Batman. Intriguingly, David S. Goyer, who co-wrote the story along with Christopher Nolan, gave us a definitive answer. When he was asked whether Blake would eventually don the Batman costume, Goyer said, "Yeah, for sure. I know this feels like a mess because on one hand we have the director's vision, whose intention was to give us an open-ended climax, and on the other we have the co-writer who made it clear that at least in his understanding, Blake discovering the cave was much more than a symbolic gesture and that he was indeed being positioned to continue Bruce's mission." So let me give you our marvelous headcanon. At first, we thought he was going to be Red Robin because of the similarity between Blake's surname and Tim Drake's in the comics. I mean, Drake sounds pretty close to Blake, right? But in reality, if we do look at Blake as Robin, he's basically a patchwork of the different Robins across Batman's history. For example, we have Blake's ability to figure out Bruce Wayne's identity, which is reminiscent of the third Robin in Batman's world, Tim Drake, who did actually figure out who Batman was. And coming to Blake's orphan background, that could have been pulled from other Robins like Jason Todd and the original Dick Grayson. Grayson's influence can further be traced with the adult career as a police officer and Blake's charm, so yeah, Blake being a composite of different Robins makes sense. However, it's my opinion that Nolan created Blake and gave him emotional baggage to make him resemble Dick Grayson even more, and that's when you start thinking that Blake was essentially Nolan's version of Nightwing. And that actually has some solid ground. Back in 1940, Dick Grayson debuted as the original Robin in issue 38 of Detective Comics, and he stayed Batman's loyal ally for a long time, until January 1984. In issue 44 of Tales of the Teen Titans, Dick Grayson retired from his role of Robin and became an iconic superhero in his own right, Nightwing. He wanted a fresh start and independence from Batman's shadow, and in this movie, we already see Blake getting everything one could wish for, and he can function very well on his own as Nightwing. There's another reason I think Blake might become Nightwing instead of Robin, and that's the brief romantic and physical moment shared between Talia al Ghul and Bruce. Comic readers already know what the consequence of that relationship could be, and hypothetically, if we're to look for a new Robin, it makes sense for Bruce and Talia's son, Damian, to eventually fill that position. To be fair, Talia al Ghul didn't live long enough to give birth to a son after she slept with Bruce Wayne, but the League of Assassins moves in mysterious ways. Even when the question of Damian growing up enough to become Robin comes into play, we can still go back to Blake as Nightwing because maybe he spent all those years as the boy wonder and eventually left the position for Damian while he went on to become Nightwing. Moreover, the movie reiterated one idea over and over again. Batman is a symbol, and it doesn't matter who the person behind the mask is as long as he's genuine enough to do whatever it takes to save Gotham. Anyone could be Batman, and so could Blake. In fact, that's exactly what fans believed, that Blake was being prepped to become the new Batman because that last sequence where he's swarmed by bats, much like how Bruce was in the beginning of his vigilante career, is unmissable. Blake was supposed to become Batman, and some intelligent big brains out there have pointed out the unmistakable imagery where Blake steps forward in the Batcave and the big platform comes out of the water to lift him into the air towards the Batman equipment. The platform lifts Blake out of sight, and the screen turns to black when the title, The Dark Knight Rises, appears. Sure, Bruce Wayne's Batman had fallen before the people of Gotham, and John Blake was supposed to be the new Dark Knight who literally and metaphorically rose to the status. Having said all that, don't you think it's still a little too soon for Blake to respond to the bat signal and take on criminals like it's another Tuesday? This conclusion, although pretty solid, seems a little hasty. See, I'm not saying that John Blake was never likely to become Batman. In fact, I think the on-screen name-dropping of Robin was intentional to confuse fans, because in no way does Blake becoming Robin really hold up. What I'm trying to say is, Blake skips the entire Robin phase. Whatever experience he had to gather as Batman's right-hand man, he probably earned it during that one time he gave a broken Bruce Wayne a ride. I mean, just kidding. In my opinion, John Blake does pick up Batman's mantle, but eventually. Maybe he works as Nightwing first and gets a hang of things, and over time, he proves himself to be worthy enough of the Batman title. Levitt himself explained that the ending of The Dark Knight Rises tried to hammer home just one idea. Batman is more than a name or a man. In his words, I don't think it's necessarily a setup. I think it's a great ending for that trilogy. If you go back to Batman Begins, he's talking about how Batman is more than a man. He's a symbol, and a hero can be anybody. That's a theme that runs throughout the trilogy.
About it throughout, that Batman is more than a man, and it's a symbol, and we all have a hero within us.
So yeah, of course Blake's journey could end as becoming Gotham's new protector, but in my mind, something similar to the Batman Battle for the Cowl storyline happens. In that story, Dick Grayson and Damian Wayne battle it out, but Nightwing becomes Batman. The thing is, Blake was never supposed to become Robin or Batman in the conventional comic book sense, neither was he supposed to be a direct adaptation of Dick Grayson. His main purpose was to prove that Batman could be separated from Bruce Wayne. According to Nolan's interpretation, Batman was supposed to be a temporary catalyst, acting as someone who encouraged Gotham to take responsibility for itself. Once that mission succeeded, Bruce didn't need to be Batman forever. He said in an interview, "For me, The Dark Knight Rises is specifically and definitely the end of the Batman story as I wanted to tell it, and the open-ended nature of the film is simply a very important thematic idea that we wanted to get into the movie, which is that Batman is a symbol. He can be anybody. And that was very important to us. Not every Batman fan will necessarily agree with that interpretation of the philosophy of the character, but for me, it all comes back to the scene between Bruce Wayne and Alfred in the private jet in Batman Begins, where the only way I could find to make a credible characterization of a guy transforming himself into Batman is if it was as a necessary symbol, and he saw himself as a catalyst for change, and therefore it was a temporary process, maybe a 5-year plan that would be enforced for symbolically encouraging the good of Gotham to take back their city. And to make sure the symbol lived on, Nolan used an eager and optimistic John Blake as the new person to walk into the Batcave, which is quite literally the world of Batman. And in a way, we can draw the conclusion that Blake does indeed become the new Batman, and probably Nolan sent this simple message in a complicated way. Personally, I think that John Blake does inherit the mantle, but yeah, in his due course. But why did Nolan choose to turn something so simple into a twisted footnote? The answer, once again, is hidden in the running themes of his Bat trilogy. It was never about who Batman was, rather it's always been about what the symbol means to someone who takes it up. What does it really mean to be Batman? And those are two very different things. While Bruce was shaped by his trauma, for Blake, his past might not have to play a central role. Maybe seeing Bruce Wayne as an established Batman did the magic for him, and he's already been inspired. John Blake had walked into the Batcave, fully aware of what the Bat symbol truly means. However, he might not walk down the same path as Bruce and prove that being Gotham City's savior does not translate to self-destruction, and that's why Nolan warped things up, because he wanted us to think and debunk every idea of Batman we knew. It was his Dark Knight, and he chose to turn him into a passing torch, and that's exactly why we should not think that John Blake just walked into Bruce's lair and put on the suit. He cannot and should not start operating on the same level as Bruce immediately. I mean, even Bruce had to spend years training and learning so that he could finally emerge as the city's guardian, and if Nolan were to continue the story, Blake would probably have needed to spend a considerable amount of time learning how to use what Bruce had left behind. Since there's no official answer, fans took things into their own hands and explored different aspects of the story in their fictional tales. For example, we have The Dark Knight Legacy, a fan continuation released soon after The Dark Knight Rises, which centered on Blake, Bruce, and Selina. There's another one named Dark Knight Rises, Weapon of the Shadows, which is a much more expanded story compared to the last one, revolving around the immediate aftermath of the film, and even brings the League of Shadows back into the narrative. Unfortunately, none of these stories is canon, nor do we have any official comic book continuation. However, these breadcrumbs have helped audiences interpret the gap that Nolan had intentionally left behind. So, what actually happens after The Dark Knight Rises? Well, none of us really know for sure. Bruce Wayne being alive and living with Selina Kyle makes sense, Bruce giving up the Batman mantle, and John Blake discovering the Batcave and getting access to everything Bruce left behind is where the movie stops spoon-feeding. Nolan made sure that the ending was ambiguous. Mind you, not a cliffhanger, but something that will always make you question what Batman really stands for and what would Blake become. And look at us. It's been more than a decade and we're still talking about it. We're still debating it. That's the beauty of a Christopher Nolan movie, I guess. Sadly though, that's all we have for you guys today. The ending of The Dark Knight Rises will probably spark theories and questions for years to come, and if we were to ever get a fourth movie, I'd really like to see Blake's version of Batman, because something tells me he'd be very different from what Bruce Wayne was. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because that's the best way to see more videos like it. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next one.